let's finish things off today by talking about jersey numbers, because that's always a fun conversation. We're not just going to rattle off, hey, here's the 5 new players who have 5 new jersey numbers. There you have it. We're going to actually gamify this, have a little bit of fun with it. 5 Penguins have officially received their new numbers according to NHL Rosters, who is going to quickly become a great source for all hockey fans. They were obviously employed previously by Cap Friendly, and since all of that happened, they're just going into business for themselves on Twitter. So a great follow on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, whatever you want to call it. We're going to do a little reveal / prediction for each of these 5 players. And we're going to start things off with Kevin Hayes, brought in, including a second round pick at the NHL draft. He's going to be wearing number 13, a number that he's worn throughout his career. When you think number 13, there's a couple of names that come to mind, right? Brandon Tanev is the latest to wear that number. You mentioned Billy Guerin whenever I mentioned 13 before the show. The one I want to compare him to is Nick Bonino here, because simply third line center. It's where he's going to slot in. So my question to you, Horwat, is does number 13, Kevin Hayes, score more points than Nick Bonino did in his last full season with the Pittsburgh Penguins? Not including that 2 games and injured stint whenever he got traded back a couple of years back. But in his final season with the Penguins, 2016-17, the final full season, Bonino scored 37 points. Does Kevin Hayes go over or under that 37?
He'd have to go over, considering what we just said he could bring. Yeah, what we just talked about. He would have to go over. So I'm gonna keep consistent. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say we've had the discussion once. We don't have to go too much further into detail. But I would expect and hope he goes over.
Yeah, I'm going to go over as well. I think that Kevin Hayes, from a pure point production standpoint, is going to be able to be around that at least 40-point pace. And I think that's going to be something the Penguins will have sorely missed, because if you look at last year, I mean, even Lars Eller, who was great, and trust me, defensively, Lars Eller was fantastic. Offensively, he was streaky. I think Kevin Hayes, at his best, will fill in those gaps a little bit more and score more than those 37 points. So that one we both go over with. Number 24 for the Penguins next year is going to be defenseman Matt Grzelcyk. This was a hard one to kind of parcel out and try to find one with. So we're going to compare him to the latest Penguin to wear the number 24, and that is Ty Smith. Will Matt Grzelcyk be a member of the Penguins organization for more days than Ty Smith did? Now, Ty Smith was a member of the Pens organization for 601 days. For that to be the case, Grzelcyk will have to be with the Pens until at least February 22nd of 2026. Does he pull this off? Which means basically, does he get another contract after this year?
That's what I was just looking for, to see how long that contract went.
1 year.
Oh, that's right. It's just a year. Didn't someone sign for 2? Sebastian Aho. Okay. 1 year deal, left side. With the future possibly in Owen Pickering coming up soonish, we'll see. Actually, the entire Penguins prospect pool is on the left side. You know what? I don't know. I bet Grzelcyk is only here for a year. I like this stat. This is a fun one to watch. But I would put the money on Matt Grzelcyk being here just for the one season, 24-25, and then walking again to UFA. Maybe he has a nice little show me here and earns a nice contract somewhere for a couple seasons worth more than 2.75.
Yeah, for me to want to pick the over for here means I'm going to want him to be mediocre, because if he's good and goes back to being his best version of himself, which is what he was most of the time in Boston, there's no way the Penguins don't trade him this season. If there's going to be a market, if he returns to being a top line capable left-handed defenseman, and the Penguins are in a rebuild. So why would they not sell him off if that's the case? So if he's mediocre, maybe he gets another contract to hold over until Pickering is 100% ready, because you don't want to rush defensemen. We saw what happened with P.O. Joseph with that. Inconsistent results, of course. So maybe he stays for another year, and if he does, then he just has to stay to the trade deadline in that second season. But I'm going to say under as well. I think as of right now, I'm not pegging Matt Grzelcyk as a multi-contract dude with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Dude, I don't know why I used that word. Let's move over to number 25. Not a big jump there, but number 25 will be Sebastian Aho. You just mentioned it. Got a 2-year contract. I'm going to compare him to a forward, which is interesting, but not too many defensemen that I wanted to compare him to with the number 25 in the Penguins history, but going to compare him to Ryan Poehling, the last player to wear number 25. The question that I have for you, Horwat, Will Sebastian Aho have a better or worse plus minus than Ryan Poehling in his first season with the Pittsburgh Penguins? Poehling, in his only year in Pittsburgh, was a -2. Sebastian Aho in his last 3 seasons with the Islanders was -7, +9, and -6. So it's going to be interesting, especially considering the fact that most people project him to not be in the starting lineup on night 1.
I think that's the hard part. It's going to depend on how many games Sebastian Aho actually plays. And if you're playing the card of Matt Grzelcyk getting traded at the deadline, that's a position where Sebastian Aho would slide right in. And there's a reason why he has a 2-year contract rather than a 1. So maybe there's something to be said about it. And as for being better than a -2, can I take the push and say it's a draw?
I mean, that's a ballsy strategy there. -2 on the dot.
That's taking green and roulette. That's a tough one. Overall, I think I would say he does over a -2, but not by much. It just depends on how much he plays. We'll see how many games Sebastian Aho can get into. We'll see if injuries take a toll of the lineup ahead of him. There's a bunch of different scenarios that could play out, but I think overall Sebastian Aho has been a pretty decent enough defenseman for himself. That little coming out party of a +9, you said?
Yeah, +9 2 years ago.
For an Islanders team and a defenseman, no less, not bad. I'd say he would get more of that train here than he would than being in a minus. So I'm going to go with the over -2 and not take the push like an idiot.
Yeah, not anything against Sebastian Aho. I'm going to say he does worse than -2, simply because I see the Penguins as a bubble playoff team that is going to give up pretty decent amount of goals. So I think with that in mind, most of the offense is going to be created by Karlsson and Letang. I'm not doing too much analysis into this. I'm just going to say he does worse than a -2, just because it's a gut feeling at this point. There's a little bit of logic behind it, but the majority of this is a gut feeling that he does worse than -2 on the season. Let's talk about number 46, somebody that is going to be beloved by Penguins fans. Blake Lizotte wearing the number 46. The last player to wear that number, Zach Aston-Reese. And this one was a little surprising to me because I didn't remember that Aston-Reese had done this well in his last year with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Will Blake Lizotte score more than what Zach Aston-Reese was on pace to score in his final full season in Pittsburgh? Zach Aston-Reese, 2020-21 season, his final full year in Pittsburgh, if he would have played an 82-game season that year, he was on pace for 16 goals. Blew my mind whenever I saw that. I believe he had 9 in like 45 games or something of that. But would Blake Lizotte this year score more or less than 16 goals is the question.
Can I be really mean and say he wasn't? Wait, was he wearing 20 or 46 that year? No, he was wearing 12 at that point.
Oh, well.
So there's an asterisk to it. But I will let it slide and say reaching the pace of, what did you say was 16?
16 goals.
He did have a good year that year, Zach Aston-Reese. 16's a lot, especially if he's only going to be playing on the 4th line or maybe 3rd. Oh, I got to go under. 16 is just quite a bit. I could see the 9 to 10 range like Aston-Reese got in his 45 games played that season. Offense has just gone to die in the Penguins' bottom 6 the last few years. And until they can prove me wrong, I got to go with the under on most goal props, point props. Lars Eller being down there should help, adding some offense to a 4th line. But at the end of the day, I think it's just going to be the under. Maybe not by much. Maybe he can get to 15 max.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how many goals Nola Chari scored last year, because I know somebody that played a lot of games down there scored 0, and we don't need to mention his name, but Nola Chari had 4 goals last year on the 4th line. Not a lot of offense coming from the 4th liners, except for, Jeff Carter had, 11? He had more than 10 goals again as a 4th line right wing. So maybe as a 4th line left wing with more talent and maybe with a more offensively inclined center, even though Lars Eller isn't going to blow the doors off of you offensively, maybe he gets up above 10, but 16, you mentioned it, is a stretch, because then you're starting to get towards him being a 20-goal scorer and on the bottom line. And like you mentioned, the bottom 6 for the Penguins has been where offense goes to die in recent years. That's going to take a Herculean effort to switch that around, especially early in the season when a lot of these guys are trying to get used to playing with each other. So I'll take the under as well. Last one here before we say goodbye today, 72. Anthony Beauvillier will wear 72. And previously, that was worn by none other than fan favorite, Patrick Hornqvist. So the question becomes, Horwat, will Anthony Beauvillier, who, listen, earlier in the show, we were talking about the merits of him potentially being on the first line, even though neither of us would personally put him there. Will Anthony Beauvillier score more goals than Patrick Hornqvist did in his final season with the Penguins, which that total was 17?
How dare you stand where he once stood? 3-time Stanley Cup champion Patrick Hornqvist. No, he's not going to score 17. Even if he is playing with Crosby, I doubt he scores 17. That's when you're starting to have the discussion of, is this kid a 20 goal scorer?
Yep.
No, it's, again, all due respect to Anthony Beauvillier. What's his career high in a single season?
If you look at his last 3 seasons, he had 5 last year between 3 teams. He had 18 the year prior, and he had 12 the year before that.
Okay, so he could float around the number. I feel like 17 is such a specific, also low for Hornqvist standards. I just don't see Anthony Beauvillier, given the position he may be playing in, hitting 17. Again, the bottom 6 is where offense goes to die in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. He'll have a good new center with him, and Kevin Hayes maybe, or Lars Eller again, feeding him. If he's maybe playing with Valtteri Puustinen, maybe there's a chance. I mean, Valtteri Puustinen's got apparently an underrated passing ability. Maybe there's something to be had there. 17 just seems like a bit of a stretch. I mean, I guess he's gotten there before, but
he has.
Just doesn't strike me as happening again. But I could be wrong on. The more I think about it, the more I talk about it. But I'm gonna stick with the gut feeling of just under, and maybe not by far.
Yeah, when you look at his second, third, and fourth season in the National Hockey League, that's 2017 to 2020. He went 21 goals, 18 goals, 18 goals. Then he had 15, 12, 18, and then fell off a cliff after that. Or actually, that was 18 was in 2022, 23, and then fell off a cliff and finished with 5 last season. So honestly, if he gets back to where he was, then I could see him getting over 18 goals. But it all depends on what opportunity he's going to be given. Is he going to be put on that first line? If he is, then I could see him getting back to where he was. If he's put on the third line and then becomes a healthy scratch because he's making way for some younger guys, Ponomarev, Koivunen, etc. We've went down that list of young guys we want to see playing the NHL probably 100 times so far this offseason. If he ends up being in that role, he's not going to get to 18. But if he plays the entire season in the lineup, if he's an everyday guy that plays, sometime with Crosby and sometime on the third line, if he gets power play 2 opportunities, then I could see him potentially scratching that 18 goal mark. But that is if he comes in and all things go right. It is a best case scenario for Anthony Beauvillier. Do I think he hits best case scenario this season? Even though, a week ago I was saying I expect him to be much better than people are giving him credit for. I don't think he hits best case scenario this season. I think he bounces back, but I'm not going to say that he bounces back to where he's scoring close to a career high in goals, even if he's playing over 20 games with a guy like Sidney Crosby. I think it's a push and it's a stretch for Beauvillier, but also because I don't see a world in where he is left on the Penguins' top line for extended periods of time this season. If it happens, I mean, it'll be a repeat of the Evan Rodriguez. Hey, he's actually performing better than we expected, but also, did we really want him there in the first place? No. As long as this stays at this level, it's fine, I guess. So I'm going to go under. That's a long-winded way of saying, I'd like to see it. And like you mentioned, this one I'm not as confident on as Blake Lizotte going under 17 or 16. What was it, 16? But I am going to go under, especially because we're not going to give a half answer here. I'm going to go under with under 17 goals with Anthony Beauvillier. So those are the final numbers here. Kevin Hayes 13, Matt Grzelcyk 24, Sebastian Aho 25, Blake Lizotte 46, and Anthony Beauvillier number 72.